After the downfall of Numenor, Elendil led his people to Eriador, whereupon he established the northern kingdom of Arnor, while his sons Isildur and Anarion founded the southern kingdom of Gondor. Arnor boasted a military shaped by Númenórean tradition, with fortified cities and a robust network of palantiri and watchtowers. At her zenith, the kingdom helped defeat Sauron, but afterwards succumbed to population decline, internal strife, and relentless assaults from Angmar. Once a mighty people, the Dunedain fell into a nomadic life of guerrilla-style warfare, hoping to see the day their great kingdom was reunited again. Welcome to our latest episode on the military history of Middle-earth, in which we will explore the tale of the vaunted and honourable warriors of Arnor and the Rangers of the North. The Kingdom of Arnor was divided into three regions: Rhudaur, Cadalan and Arthedain, with a population consisting of the Dunedain who intermarried with middlemen of Eriador. The capital of Arnor was initially the city of Annúminas, with her second greatest city being Fornost. Additionally, Arnor possessed fortified settlements such as Longdair, Amon Sul, Elostirion, Tharbad and Bree. In SA 3430, Arnor joined the Last Alliance, as Elendil led his people to face Sauron. The first pitched battle took place at the plains of Dagorlad, outside of Mordor, in the year 3434, with supreme command of the Alliance forces being granted to Gil-galad. However, this grant of command triggered the arrogance of the elves, namely that of the kings of Mirkwood and Lorien, Oropher and Amdir respectively. As both forces deployed their formations, one of the main advantages the Last Alliance possessed was their cohesion and discipline, for which the elven swordsmen in particular were famed far and wide. Yet the two aforementioned kings, angered by Gil-galad's command, broke formation and charged wildly at the immense force of orcs and foul beasts, attempting to garner fame and fortune by their exploits. Despite making early gains and driving the orcs back by the sheer force of their strength at arms, the numbers and sheer brutality of their foe soon led to casualties among the elves. Before long, the elves who had foolishly charged into the forces of the Dark Lord were pushed back, leaving the fate of the battle on a knife's edge. His plan disrupted by the folly of his comrades, Gil-galad acted decisively, supporting the errant elven contingent with the weight of the entirety of what the free peoples of Middle-earth could muster. The leadership of Gil-galad ultimately saved the day, and the war effort as a whole, as the forces of Sauron were decisively beaten, leaving the Dark Lord on the back foot for the remainder of the war. From here, the conflict continued and culminated in a siege of Barad-dûr. The siege would go on for 7 years, with massive casualties dealt to the forces of the Last Alliance. Countless sorties of orcs were sent out to drive back the besiegers, which when combined with the volleys of arrows, boulders and missiles of the flaming variety that constantly harassed the attackers, threatened to decimate the Alliance forces. Despite the increasing pressure which was placed upon their lines, this stalemate was maintained, with massive casualties inflicted on both sides. As the battle progressed, the Last Alliance began to gain the advantage, standing as a cliff before the oncoming tide. The morale of the orcish rabble began to falter, and it seemed that victory now was within the grasp of Gil-galad and Elendil. It was at this point that Sauron, in his physical form of a towering warrior, clad in plate armor from head to toe, and wielding a mace alongside the One Ring, entered the fray. Making for the center of the Alliance formation, he soon made light work of the valiant warriors who had held his servants at bay for so long. Seeing that their lines might now break, Gil-galad and Elendil duelled Sauron, who had not reached his full strength yet, on the broken plains of Mordor, displaying the great valor inherent within their people, proving to be a match for the Dark Lord. As the battle raged around them, the two great leaders of the Last Alliance mortally wounded Sauron, but paid a heavy price for their courage. Gil-galad was cast down with the heat of Sauron's armoured hand, and Elendil was likewise struck down by the Maiar, who was wounded in the process. The sheer weight of the blow drove Sauron from his physical form, causing him to take on his ethereal aspect, and his disappearance sent his entire army into a rout. In the aftermath, Isildur, who came upon the corpses of the great leaders of the Alliance, was heartbroken by the loss of his father. He took up the shattered remnant of Narsil and strode towards the ailing Maiar. Bending down, Isildur cut off the armoured finger which held the One Ring, and claimed it as his own weregild. Sauron's spirit fled his physical form. Narsil, however, would live long in the memory of the Dark Lord, and he would forever bear an unequivocal hatred for the line of kings of the Númenórean exiles. Being the elder son and current king of Gondor, Isildur was to inherit the high kingship of Arnor. In TA2, Isildur rode north for Arnor with his 3 sons and 200 veteran knights and soldiers of Arnor. To the left of the company were an imposing set of cliffs overlooking the Anduin, and to their right were hills and forested areas. The Dunedain had been singing marching songs. However, this ceased immediately as one of their scouts had heard an oncoming horde of orcs. Acting quickly, Isildur formed his men into a thangale, which meant shield fence or wall in Númenórean. This formation was 2 men deep and flexible on the flanks, allowing for quick readjustments, and would favour the Númenóreans, who estimated that they were outnumbered almost 10-1. Isildur begrudged the terrain for forcing him to take such a defensive stance, as if the orcs had attacked them earlier in the march, they could have formed a Dirnaith, which was a wedge-shaped formation that would have allowed the superior martial prowess of his retinue to shatter the orcish lines, sending them into a quick rout. The battle began with a volley of orcish arrows, quickly followed up by an assault at the very centre of the shield wall. The disciplined Númenóreans stood strong and used their immense height, with which they towered over even the largest orc, to push back this onslaught. Isildur was no fool, however, and seeing the overwhelming size of the orcish horde, sent his squire with the shards of his father's sword, Narsil, to Rivendell, in order to entrust them with Lord Elrond before continuing the fight himself. The battle restarted following this brief pause, and piles of orc corpses had begun to mount around the Númenórean lines, who, utilizing their superior longbows, drove the enemy from the pathway. Believing that the orcs, with their craven nature, had been sufficiently demoralized as to flee the field, Isildur gave orders to move to lower, more level ground. The orcs, however, had greater numbers than the estimation Isildur had given them, and returned in force as the shield wall had begun to move. During this secondary assault, the orcs attacked in a full crescent formation in order to place immense pressure upon the entirety of the Dunedain defensive formation. With their massive numerical advantage, the orcish pressure began to pay off, and men began to die, their formation beginning to collapse. Isildur put on the Ring of Sauron, which granted invisibility to the wearer, and fled down the valley as his retinue paid with their lives to give their king a fighting chance at escape, dying almost to a man. That included Elendor, who fought a rearguard action to buy his father more time. Abandoning his arms and armour, bar a short sword, Isildur plunged into the Anduin, yet in its flooded state, the strength of the river began to overwhelm the High King, and he was pulled further and further towards the marshes of the Gladden fields. He became tangled in the reeds and rushes, and the One Ring was pulled from Isildur's finger, who initially felt unmitigated loss at this, but soon after a feeling of immense burden being taken from him. This feeling of absolution was not to last, however, as emerging from the river, a group of orcish archers spotted this imposing mountain of a man and feathered him with arrows rather than meeting the unarmoured warrior in hand-to-hand combat. Isildur's body fell back into the river, never to be recovered. His arms and armour were found in the aftermath of the battle, but the ring itself would not be discovered again until Hobbit Daegul happened upon it in TA 2463. In the meantime, a force of woodmen who were friends of the Beornings and dwelt within the western part of Greenwood had come to relieve the Dunedain rearguard. They arrived too late, however, and would only save 3 of the Dunedain.
Isildur's youngest son, Valandil, inherited the throne of Arnor, while his nephew, Meneldiel, inherited the throne of Gondor. Neither Valandil, Meneldiel, nor their subsequent heirs would lay claim to high kingship. Thus, the kingdoms remained split until the end of the Third Age. Valandil inherited an Arnor that had been greatly depopulated due to the War of the Last Alliance and the disaster of the Gladden Fields. Valandil reigned for 239 years, the longest of any king of Arnor or Gondor. He was succeeded in TA 249 by his son Eldacar. From there, Arnor experienced a period of long peace, lasting until the death of King Eärendil in TA 861. Both Arnor and Gondor take inspiration from the Roman Empire, much like how the Trojan Aeneas came to Italy, where his descendants Romulus and Remus would later found the city of Rome. Elendil and his descendants founded their kingdoms in exile. Furthermore, as Rome split into the Western and Eastern empires, so too did Arnor and Gondor split from one whole into two halves. However, Rome is not the only real-world civilization from which Arnor and Gondor take inspiration. In a letter to Rona Bear, Tolkien stated Gondor and Arnor were also similar to the North and South kingdoms of Egypt in regards to their gigantic constructions, use of tombs, and theology. When Eärendil's eldest son, Amlaeth, laid claim to the throne of Arnor, he was contested by his two younger brothers, whose quarrels divided the kingdom in three. Amlaeth ruled Arthedain, while his two brothers ruled over Cardolan and Rhudaur. By this time, Annúminas had become nearly deserted, prompting Amlaeth to move his capital to Fornost. Arthedain retained Amon-Sul and three of the Palantiri, driving the other petty kingdoms to fight over them. Meanwhile, Sauron's most powerful Nazgul, the Witch King, saw the disunity in Arnor and sought to exploit it. He established the evil realm of Angmar, gathering orcs, evil men, and fell creatures into his service. When Argalep I took the throne of Arthedain in TA 1226, he proclaimed lordship over all of Arnor, on the basis that Cardolan and Rhudaur no longer held any descendants of Isildur. Cardolan placed itself under his suzerainty, but the rulers of Rhudaur refused the claim, and instead allied themselves with the Hillmen. The Hillmen were secretly in the service of Angmar, and quickly seized control over Rhudaur, killing the region's Dunedain population or forcing them to flee. Together, Rhudaur and Angmar launched an assault on the Weather Hills, in a hard-fought siege which saw King Argalep I fall in battle. His son, Arvalek I, counterattacked with help from Cardolan and the Elves of Lindon, dislodging the enemy from the Weather Hills. So it was that Arthedain and Cardolan held the frontier. However, Angmar attacked again in TA 149, slaying Arvalek I, the last prince of Cardolan, and razing Amon-Sul. The Witch King then ravaged Cardolan, driving its Dunedain population to the Barrow Downs and Old Forest. Arthedain was beset, but King Arafor repelled the enemy from Fornost to the North Downs. For the next centuries, a coalition of Arthedain and elves from Lindon, Rivendell and Lorien kept Angmar at bay. During the late reign of Argalep II, the Great Plague destroyed the north and south garrisons at Tharbad before it spread to Eriador. By TA 1636, most of the people of Cardolan had died, especially those dwelling in Minhiriath. The Shire was also hit greatly, but Arthedain was relatively unaffected. Afterwards, Angmar and Rhudaur unleashed Barrow Wights to infest and haunt the Barrow Downs. Believing a singular evil power had coordinated the disasters, King Araphant renewed the ancient alliance with Gondor in TA 1940, wedding his son Arvedui to Firiel, the daughter of King Ondaher of Gondor. In TA 1944, Ondaher and both his sons were slain in battle, prompting Arvedui to claim the throne. However, the Lords of Gondor refused the reunification and instead crowned Eärnil II. Despite this, Gondor maintained good relations and promised aid against Angmar. During the reign of Arvedui in TA 1973, he sent word to Gondor that Angmar was preparing a final assault. King Eärnil mustered a great armament bound for Lindon, but it would arrive too late. During the harsh winter of TA 1974, the Witch King attacked Arthedain with a host exceeding 40,000. During the battle for Fornost, Arthedain was supported by the Elves of Lindon, Rivendell and Lothlorien, and 500 Hobbit archers from the Shire. Yet despite these reinforcements, their forces were overrun. The coalition forces fled over the Lune, as the Witch King pillaged the capital. Arvedui sought refuge in the Lossoth of Forrakil, as Círdan attempted a seaborne rescue at Ice Bay. However, Arvedui died during a shipwreck, losing the Palantiri of Fornost and Amon-Sul. Afterwards, the Gondorians arrived at Lindon, joining the host of the West, who defeated the Witch King and destroyed the last vestiges of Angmar. Having further explored the history of Arnor, we can extrapolate yet more parallels that Tolkien wrote between it and the late Roman Empire of his world. Both the Western Roman Empire and Arnor suffered at the hands of a great plague, internal strife, and barbarian invasion from the north. The Italian city-states, which emerged in Rome's wake, and the three petty kingdoms that arose from Arnor's fall, would take centuries to recover and reunite. Aranarth, the son of Arvedui and Firiel, a descendant from both Isildur and Anarion, chose not to call himself a king or prince, but instead assumed the title of chieftain over the few Dunedain remaining in the north. They became known as the Rangers of the North, who led a secretive and wandering lifestyle within Eriador. The heirlooms and heirs of Isildur were all secretly born and raised in Rivendell. The Rangers defended the region for centuries, overseen by 16 chieftains, many of whom died in battle. The Shire flourished under their protection, experiencing minor conflict on two rare occasions, against orcs at the Battle of Grenfields in TA 2747 and against wolves during the fell winter of TA 2911 to 2912. The following year, great floods devastated Enetwaith and Minhiraeth, leaving Tharbad in ruins. In TA 2039, Aragorn II became the last chieftain, taking on great adventures such as hunting down Gollum, serving King Fengel of Rohan and Steward Ecthelion II of Gondor, joining the Fellowship of the Ring, and participating in the War of the Ring. Aragorn's second-in-command, Halbarad, led the Grey Company to assist him in crossing the paths of the dead, defeating the Corsairs of Umbar at Peлагir and during the Battle of Pelennor Fields. After the defeat of Sauron, Aragorn was crowned King Elessar, who finally reunited the Kingdom of Gondor and Arnor, ushering in the Fourth Age. The Rangers of the North represent a nomadic horse culture not too dissimilar to that found in the Comanche Empire. Like the Rangers, the Comanches of the Great American Plains were a dwindling people who had suffered depopulation due to disease and enemy encroachment. Thus they took up a civilization based on roaming the land on horseback, raiding their enemies using guerrilla-style warfare. The backbone of the Númenórean military had been the infantry marine, as the majority of their battles were amphibious in nature. Arnor would have retained infantry marines, but given their new geography, the Dunedain would act more so as heavy infantry and heavy cavalry. Both Arnor and Gondor established a ranked system of knighthood. Otar was the title of warrior for those trained and experienced in soldiery, but who had not yet been granted the rank of Roken or knight. It also seems Arnor retained a form of the king's archers, as during the Battle of Gladden Fields, some of the Dunedain were armed with steel bows. The middlemen of Eriador made up the bulk of Arnor's army, most likely acting as light infantry, archers, light cavalry, horseback archers, and garrisoned men in Arnor's cities and fortifications. Arnor was also known to augment its forces on rare occasions, as in TA 1975, the Shire dispatched a company of archers to help defend Fornost against Angmar. Arnor depended on its military alliances with Gondor, the Elves of Lindon, Rivendell and Lothlorien, and to a lesser extent the Dwarves, to face Mordor and Angmar. However, by the time of the War of the Ring, Arnor had declined greatly, and was only able to dispatch the Grey Company. These units were similar to the Rangers of Ithilien, and akin to Dunedain's special forces, wearing cloaks for camouflage, tracking their enemies from great distances, and able to live off the land. Descending from a seagoing people, Arnor's military vessels most likely mirrored the ships of the King of Gondor, with the captain of the hosts serving as the supreme admiral. Even during the time of the Rangers of the North, it seems that Arnor's prowess in marine warfare was prevalent, as Halbarad captained a corsair ship to bring Aragorn and their company to the Pelennor Fields. Arnor's military structure most likely mirrored Gondor, with the king holding absolute power over the army and navy, possessing the right to forge alliances, and being bestowed with the right to use or allow others the use of the Palantiri. Below the king was a council, consisting of lords of fiefdoms and captains from the military. The Arnor military ranking system may have been simplified to captain of the hosts, captains, Roken, Otar, and common soldiers. For communications, Elendil brought 7 Palantiri to Middle-earth, with 3 set in Arnor and 4 in Gondor. The King of Arnor used them to Asanwi, a form of mental communication between the realms, but also to see what was occurring in the other realms as well. Arnor retained the craftsmanship of Númenor, with ironsmith techniques such as the ability to produce rust-proof weapons strong enough to penetrate troll hides. The smiths of Arnor spell-wrapped swords, such as the Barrow Blades, and perhaps imbued spells into their masonry work, as seen at Orthanc and Minas Tirith. In the past, Númenóreans were geared specifically for amphibious warfare. They went into battle equipped with a Karma helmet, marine-styled armor, and wielded swords, axes, spears, daggers, and bows. They carried a sealed wallet, a small vial of cordial, and wafers of waybread on their belts that could sustain them for many days. They towered over their primary enemy, the Orc. During the Battle of Gladden Fields, the Dunedain were so tall that their swords and spears used over their shields easily outranged the Orcs. Steel bows were also present during this battle. Given the geography of Arnor and the greater use of horses, the Otar and Roquen would wear similar but heavier armor than their forebears. However, the Rangers of the North wore dark grey cloaks, with cloak clasps shaped like rayed stars and hoods over their helms. They were equipped with spears, bows, swords, and shields. They seemed to be much lighter than their forebears, as their military situation dictated concealment, speed, and self-sufficiency. Arnor's military formations derived from Númenórean defensive Thangale and offensive Dunedain phalanxes. These were present during the Battle of Gladden Fields, as were steel bows, capable of firing from a distance of 600 yards. Given its geography and lack of a mounted ally like Rohan, it seems Arnor invested more in cavalry than Gondor did. Perhaps the Dunedain Roquen acted as heavy cavalry, while middlemen operated as horseback archers. Given all of this, Arnor operated like a typical Middle Ages army. Despite Arnor's impressive military and weaponry, their most formidable strength lay in fortifications. Similar to Gondor, when Elendil established Arnor, he constructed and inherited fortified cities, ports, and watchtowers, most notably upon the Weather Hills. Upon the Weather Hills, lying in the centre of Eriador, the Tower of Amon Sul would become the tri-state point between Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. When Angmar rose, and especially after its conquest of Rhudaur, Amon Sul became the focal point of Arnor and Arthedain's border defence. Elendil placed a palantir at Amon Sul, connecting it to 5 others. Thus, Amon Sul acted both as a border defence and early warning system for Arnor and later Arthedain. This is why Cardolan, Rhudaur, and Angmar strove to take Amon Sul, for it was the gateway to conquering Arnor. During the time of the Rangers of the North, it seemed the Dunedain exclusively performed guerrilla-style warfare. They seemed to function similarly to the nomadic horse culture of the Comanche Empire, using the horse to cover great distances, utilizing light concealed weapons and arms, raiding the enemy wherever they could. The ultimate downfall of Arnor did not come from a lack of military tactics, weaponry, or fortifications, but rather population decline and internal strife, allowing Angmar to conquer it. The War of the Last Alliance, Battle of Gladden Fields, and Great Plague combined to empty out Arnor's fortified cities, ports, and watchtowers. With them abandoned and Arnor fragmented into 3 petty kingdoms, Angmar was able to nearly extinguish the Dunedain of the North. The tale of Arnor is a sober reminder of how discord from within can often prove as fatal as threats from without. More videos on the military cultures of Middle-earth are on the way. In the meantime, we're planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi, and space opera universes, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.